Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from today. Welcome to this Agile Business webcast series broadcast, Agile Transformation Strategy, a Blueprint for Enterprise Success. This webcast is brought to you by CMC Media and is sponsored by CollabNet. I'm Bob Aiello, Editor-in-Chief of CM Crossroads, and I'll be your moderator today for this webcast. In just a few moments, Angela Druckman and David Parker will join us to discuss Agile Transformation Strategy. But just a few housekeeping details. Our live cast environment is intended to be completely interactive, so you'll have the ability to post your questions at any time during the broadcast or chat with other attendees about the session. Just use the live chat window directly below the webcast window. You can also undock the chat box from the screen and using the pop-out button at the bottom right corner of that chat box. That way it won't get hidden behind the slides. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's event, please use Twitter and Facebook. Links above the slides to share, and Tweet Roll panel will show you today's active comments. We already have some of those out there. I put a few up last night myself. And you'll want to use the hashtag of #AgileLC in your tweets to get on the tweet roll. If you'd like a copy of the presentation materials for today's session, you'll find a button to download a copy of today's presentation and other files under the Resources tab at the top right corner of the page. A recording of the entire live broadcast, including questions and answers, will be available in about 24 hours at the same location, so you can come back again or recommend it to a friend. And finally, if you ever need to get closer to any slide during the presentation, just hover your mouse over the video player and click the full button to expand to full screen. Okay, so let me introduce our speakers joining us today. Having served as a product owner, Scrum Master, and team member, Angela Druckman has seen firsthand how Agile practices, and Scrum in particular, can lead organizations to project success. Its certified Scrum trainers and a member of its Scrum core team, she helps organizations harness the Scrum framework's potential, conducting dozens of public training courses each year, as well as providing on-site private coaching. Working closely with customers in such diverse fields as semiconductors, financial services, media, and consulting services, with projects that have ranged from small contract jobs to multi-year, multi-million-dollar initiatives. She has repeatedly helped teams surface and resolve organizational dysfunction through Scrum. And David Parker is a Vice President and General Manager for CollabNet's Scrum business line. In this role, David contributes to the strategic direction of this business unit's products and training services. David brings to this role more than 20 years in the software industry with roles in product management, applications development, and application lifecycle management. Much of his career has been spent in posting overseas, including stints in Europe and Asia. He holds a BA from Emory University in Atlanta and an MBA from the American Graduate School of International Management in Glendale, Arizona. So welcome aboard, both David and Angela. Angela, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Bob. Well, welcome, everyone, to talk today about a topic that, as Scrum trainers, we certainly are getting more and more questions about these days, which is, how do I go through an Agile transformation? In other words, not so much how do I learn Scrum, how do I learn about Agile, but the next step. I want to take my whole organization to a new level with Agile. How do I do that? So that's the topic of this webinar. So just really briefly, we'll go over kind of how the flow of the webinar is going to work. We'll start off with some basic introductions, and since you know a little bit about David and I now, I'll probably just let you read those at your leisure. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the changing face of Agile, and what I mean about that is who is pursuing agility now? I think it's really changed, especially over about the last 5 or 6 years. We're seeing a shift in who is interested in becoming agile and the kinds of goals that they have when they start to pursue this effort. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be agile. I think there's a lot of misconception out there about what that term means, so I want to set a common definition for us. Then we'll go through the adoption phases, and these are phases that we at CollabNet grew to observe as we're working with clients of different sizes in different sorts of industries. We noticed that there were patterns of adoption, not rigid phases, but more of a general flow of activities that tend to happen in a general order. So we'll review those. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the final phase of Agile adoption, which we call transformation, and talk about what does transformation look like. And the short answer is it looks different in different kinds of companies. So I'm going to give you 3 very, very disparate examples of organizations that I personally work with that are at a transformation level. And then one of the things I think it's really important to discuss is what are some of the challenges people run into? What are the problems they have? As an Agile coach, that's what I do. I come in and help with problems. And very often, by the time I get there, the problems are pretty intense. So we'll talk a little bit about how to avoid that, because I really do believe that many of the challenges that people have, it doesn't need to be as hard as it is. So there are some ways to really avoid that. And then, as Bob mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for questions. And I do want to encourage you, as we're going through the presentation, if you think of something, oh gosh, I want a little more information about that, please feel free to type the question in right at that time, because a lot of times people get involved in the presentation and we get to the end and there aren't any questions because people were listening. So do feel free to just type them in as we're going along. So this is the slide that I said would have a little bit about us, but as I said, we went through the introduction, so I don't think I need to give you too much more about me. The one thing I would say about CollabNet, if you haven't heard of us or if you don't know who we are, one of the things that we do is we support kind of all facets of Agile transformation, everything from training and coaching to tools. And this is one of the great things about being with CollabNet is it gives the trainers and coaches, for example, an opportunity to really see organizations in just every phase of Agile transformation, from, at the very dead solid beginning to organizations that are really doing wonderful and amazing things. So I'll let you learn more about CollabNet on your own time. Let's go ahead and dig into the material. So I've mentioned that there's a changing face of Agile. So what I mean by that is Agile used to really be considered to be a fringe approach. It's funny, a few years ago, I would teach classes, and the typical kind of person that I would get in my class was very much a self-described maverick. So they would come to me, they would say, my boss doesn't know I'm here, or I really had to fight to get the budget to be able to come to this. That just isn't the case anymore. It really isn't. What we're seeing is a dramatic shift in the kinds of people that are seeking out training, the kinds of people that are saying, hey, we really want to talk about what it's going to take our whole organization Agile. So the first big change that I noticed is the kinds of organizations that are adopting Agile practices. It's a much broader range now. And the people in those organizations that are coming to us saying we need help, it really has shifted quite a bit. It's not these hidden mavericks anymore who are trying to kind of keep what they're doing hidden from the rest of the organization. It really could be anybody from anywhere in the organization. And then finally, I think the results that people are trying to get from Agile they've morphed, they've grown. Again, this maverick type of person who would come to a course 5 years ago, they would say things like, You know, we get these unrealistic schedules, and the team works like crazy to meet them. And a lot of times we do meet them, but we feel so beat up afterwards. Is there maybe a better way to do this? So in other words, a lot of the results of Agile were keyed strictly towards the team, making life better for the team. So the good news is it's still good for the team, but there are benefits now that can be seen throughout the whole organization. So when you add up all of these factors, what you really find is that Agile's kind of mainstream now. It's the way people are trying to get work done. So just to give you a little bit more detail on that, 5 or 6 years ago, when I think about the typical Agile customer I would work with, it was almost always a small organization. If it was a larger organization, it would be this tiny little isolated group within that company. And usually those people were doing what we call stealth Scrum or stealth Agile. So they were kind of keeping it hidden from the rest of the company. A lot of times these were technology companies too, and a lot of reasons for that. One, I think, is you don't get involved in a technology company if you're really uncomfortable with change, or at least you're signing up for an unhappy life if you do. People who work in technology understand that things are going to change all the time. The other thing about technology companies, particularly the small companies, it's a very competitive world out there. You cannot afford to fall behind. So I think that attitude of are there any little advantages that we can get really drew people to frameworks like Scrum. And very often pilot projects were done in stealth mode. They were hidden. I can tell you a story of a project manager who became a Scrum Master, well, first a product owner and then a Scrum Master. It's a very personal story because it's my story. When I got introduced to Scrum, this is pretty typical. A few of my managers in my organization went to a course. They'd heard about it. They were very excited. They came back to me as a project manager. They said, you know, we need to do a pilot project with this Scrum thing. It's going to be really great. So you have a big project going on right now. We'd like to use your project. And boy, I couldn't say no fast enough. I just didn't have any faith in it. I was worried it wasn't going to work out well. So what we finally agreed to do is I said, you can use my project, but I don't want the customer to know a thing about it. We did stealth Scrum, and I served as the product owner for that project. So that was very typical of that time period. And the reason at the time that I didn't want my customer to know about it is it was just too different. It was just too radical, and I thought it would be better to try it for a few sprints, see how it went, and then if it didn't completely fall apart, then we would tell the customer about it. And of course, as you can probably tell by what I do for a living now, it went really well, and we were very excited about the results we got, and were able then to share with our customer. But that kind of attitude, that kind of, if I tell people about this, they're going to think I'm crazy, was very typical back then. Nowadays, it just couldn't be more different. The companies I work with now are just, they're a world apart. Those technology companies are still there, but we're seeing organizations like banks, like chemical companies, like people who build railroad cars. I mean, literally organizations that you would think, wow, they want to be agile. The federal government. All of these different kinds of organizations are realizing that there are benefits for them as well in the agile space. And the other thing is they're more likely to come to us looking for a way to really do what I call a full-scale transition. So not so much saying, hey, I've heard you guys teach classes. When is your next class in Pittsburgh? But more, we need you to come on site. We need you to help us figure out a plan for the next 5 years and taking our entire organization agile. So with that, let's take a moment and talk about what does it mean to be agile. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that term. So sometimes I'll come into organizations to coach and they'll say, well, you know, we just pretty much, we don't really plan because we're an agile team. So we react to everything and we just respond as fast as we can, and that's being agile. And I couldn't disagree more. That has nothing to do with agility. That is being reactive. And living in a reactive space is a very dangerous place to be because it negates your ability to plan ahead. So when I teach my Certified Scrum Master course, what I really try to convey to people is that if I could pick one word that I really associate with Agile, what does it mean to be Agile? It's the word disciplined. Agile involves taking a disciplined approach to decision making. And when I have people in my Scrum class, what I take great pains to tell them is, Scrum isn't going to make you psychic. It isn't going to make you know what's going to happen in all facets of your industry in the next 6 months. But what it will help you do is make the very best and rational decision with the information known at the time. And you might say, well, people do that all the time. Maybe in your world they do, but in the companies that I go in and help, they really don't. I find people making very reactive decisions. And when people are very reactive, emotions tend to creep in. So one of the great things about Agile and taking a disciplined approach is it tends to calm down some of those emotions. So this, I think, is actually a very good definition of what it means to do Agile software development. And there might be some of you out there today that don't do software development. What I'm finding more and more is that people coming to our courses, they might be in a company that develops software. They might be in more of an IT organization that supports the software, but they might be in a completely different industry, and that's okay too. Actually, one of the most common types of attendees that I get in my course outside the world of software is people in advertising. They find the whole process of agility works very well in their business too. So when you read this definition and you see that it's a conceptual framework for doing software engineering, keep in mind that that's how it was developed when Scrum and Agile was first being created, but it's much, much more than that. But you can see by this definition that what Agile really emphasizes is this idea of having a working product. Working product is the measure of success. And what we try to do when we take an Agile approach is we're always thinking about minimizing risk. The whole idea with an Agile approach is you're accepting the fact that you have a project that has inherent unknowns in it. If you don't have a lot of unknowns, I'll be really honest, I don't know if to say Agile's going to get you a lot. Sort of a predictive approach like a traditional methodology probably works fine if you really don't have any unknowns. But that tends not to happen in technology companies, and really in very many companies anymore these days. There's just a fair amount of unknown. So the way that Agile seeks to control this is to focus on iteration. So they say, okay, we understand and we acknowledge we're not going to be able to make predictions about what's going to happen in this project over the next 6 months. So instead, we're going to take shorter iterations. We're going to take iterations of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and we're going to, at a point in each of those iterations, have an inspect and adapt point so that if new information has come in, new issues have arisen, then we can address them at that time. That's why all of the Agile methods, whether you're talking about extreme programming or Scrum, whatever, they all focus on this idea of an iteration, and it's to be able to fold in these inspect and adapt points. So let's continue and talk a little bit about the adoption phases. So as I mentioned in the intro, these adoption phases, don't think of them as very, very rigid phases. It's more a general trend and a general flow of what we see when we go out to coach organizations that come to us and say, hey, you know, we're serious about this. We really want to take this to the next level. What should we be doing right now? So I want to take a fair amount of time here and go through each of these phases. And as I'm doing that, I'm sure for those of you who are doing Agile, what might be on your mind is trying to place yourself on this continuum. Where are you? So definitely kind of keep that in mind as we're talking through the phases. And again, just a quick reminder, as questions come up in your mind, feel free to enter those right away in the chat window, and we'll get to those at the end. There's no need to wait to the end to enter them. So the first adoption phase that we see is what we generally describe as exploration. So this is when people are first getting interested in Agile. They're going to take a path probably that's very similar to the path that I described I took. They're going to start with a pilot project or maybe a couple of pilot projects. This whole phase is really about skill building. So there'll probably be some training involved. A lot of times organizations, even if it's a huge organization, they might only want to get a group or two trained at this point, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's important that the people involved in those original, that original pilot do get the training, though. You definitely can, if you want to do something like Scrum, you can pick up a book. You can learn a lot about it. But what you end up doing is you end up learning via the blind leading the blind as far as experience. And you can do that, but it's painful. It's kind of like going down to your local music store and grabbing several music books and deciding to teach yourself how to play the piano. You can do it, but there's no substitute for having somebody who's been through some of this before and can give you some advice. The single thing I think that is most important to try to get out of the exploration phase is practice. People don't give this enough attention. They don't acknowledge enough how important this is. And I always find it kind of interesting. People will say, they'll say something like, well, we tried an Agile project and we did 2 sprints and it was just terrible. We tried to write those user story things. They weren't very good and the product owner didn't really know what she was doing and the team had a hard time doing estimates, so we just quit. So that's kind of analogous to taking a couple of piano lessons and saying, well, I can't play any concertos yet, so obviously this whole lesson thing doesn't work. I'm going to quit. I mean, really, would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. And when we talk about something like playing a musical instrument or learning a new sport, we understand that. We understand that it's one thing to know the rules, but practice, practice, practice is what has to come next. And it's just kind of funny how people forget that when it comes to something like learning about Agile, learning something like Scrum. There's no substitute for practice. So for those of you who feel like you're in the exploration phase, if you feel like you're making a lot of mistakes and things are really tough, that's fantastic. You're right where you should be. You're learning. You're a beginner. And there's no quick way through this phase. You just need to get some practice under your belt. But the good news is sooner or later, if you keep working at it, you'll get into what I refer to as the coordination phase. So some things that I see when organizations are moving to this phase, I see them get more serious about training. So they say, okay, it's not enough to just have the people on a couple of teams trained. We need to get serious about this. We need to get all of our, for example, software developers trained. We need to get our managers trained so they can understand how they can support Scrum and Agile. And hopefully what I see here is that they get very, very serious about getting the product owners trained. Probably one of the top 3 issues I am called in to help with in coaching is product owners who are not, for whatever reason, very good at their job. When I get in to help these product owners, I often find out that the, quote, training they've received is a 60-second conversation with the Scrum Master that goes something like this. Hey, Susie, you're going to be our product owner now. So what this means is you're going to take all your requirements, we're going to call them user stories now, and we're going to put them in a big list called the product backlog. So you need to have that ready by Monday. That's when we're going to start. That was her training. That was Susie's training right there. So surprise, surprise, she fails, right? She's not very good. She doesn't understand what's expected of her. So in the coordination phase, it is so important to get the product organization on board. You need to get them trained. And the other thing that they need to understand is what's in it for us. It can't be all about the team. I mean, think about it. Anything that you decide to embark on or decide to get involved in your mind, whether it's a conscious question or a subconscious, you're thinking, what's in it for me? And it's no different for the product organization here. Some other things that happen in this phase, you're definitely going to see the Scrum teams get very interested in adopting technical best practices. So this is where they might fold in the principles of something like extreme programming if you are in a technology space. But they're definitely going to start to say, okay, what are some things we can do from a technical best practice direction to make all of this that we're doing with Agile flow better, to make it more likely that we'll meet our commitments. So you start to see teams experimenting with continuous integration, experimenting with things like pair programming. And what needs to go hand in hand with this is they need to start to do what I call tool exploration. It is very painful to try to do wide-scale Agile with tools that were clearly meant for another type of approach, tools that were meant for more of a waterfall approach. So it's very natural in the coordination phase that this is where we get people calling us up at CollabNet and saying, hey, I heard you guys got that tool, ScrumWorks Pro, and it's made for Scrum. How exactly does that work? Can we get a trial of it? It's very, very common. That's a sign they're in the coordination phase, that they've realized that the tools that they're using right now just are not working for them. They need something that is more Agile specific. The final thing that I really like to see in this phase is I like to see organizations thinking about developing what I call Agile advocates. These are people who are going to be coaches, like I'm a coach, except they work right in the organization. So these are people who are going to help teach others. They're going to help get others excited about Agile. And it really gives an organization momentum, because the bottom line is I can't be there with you forever, right? So I can come in periodically and I can help, but I need to have people I can leave on the ground who are kind of like my lieutenants, and to be able to say, okay, here are the things I think your organization should work on in the next 6 months until I visit again. You guys go out and help them do that. So these Agile advocates are very, very important. Moving on, the third phase of adoption that we see is what we describe as process definition. So this is where everything gets a little bit more formal. Some of the characteristics we see here are, first of all, tools formalization. This is often the stage where an organization is going to pick a tool set. They're going to say, okay, we've done this long enough. We know what we need. We've tried a few free samples, if you will. Now we're ready to go ahead and make a commitment on a tool set. And this is where we often will see, for example, with CollabNet, this is where people are coming in and saying, okay, we had 20 licenses to experiment with ScrumWorks Pro. We're ready to go ahead and roll it out organization-wide now. So that's a very, very typical thing to do. Another thing for larger organizations in this adoption phase is we're going to see the PMO get involved. So up until this point, a lot of times there's a little bit of contention between the PMO and the people doing Agile. And there's really no reason for it, because the PMO can be an active participant in the move to Agile. And I think if you haven't done it yet, by the time you get to process definition, you need to reach out to them. So those of you who are Scrum Masters, who are in the product organization, reach out to your PMO and say things like, hey, we want to get you involved. We want to try to describe the process of how we do Agile so that we can formalize it within the PMO. I think that's a very good thing to do. It's a very healthy thing to do. And these people can help you. They're very good at defining processes. So I think it can be a very collaborative effort. The other thing that can happen at this stage that's really useful is you start to formalize the Scrum Master and Product Owner roles. And what I mean by that is you have the Scrum Masters recognized as a group. Like, for example, for many of you today, probably you recognize project managers as a group, right? Maybe they're part of something called a PMO. You need to do the same thing with your Scrum Masters and your same thing with your product owners. You'll get different benefits from each group. So for the Scrum Master group, when you can start formalizing them and having them meet together on a regular basis, what they're going to be able to do is better understand organizational impediments. So those of you who are familiar with Scrum know that impediment is a special word in Scrum. It's a process or condition that exists in your organization today that's not in its best long-term interest. So it's something that's causing you difficulties or problems. In the beginning, when you start to use an agile process like Scrum, you will raise impediments so fast it will make your head spin. And you will have more impediments, I can almost guarantee, than you have time or money to fix. And so what you've got to do is you've got to have a way to kind of get your arms around all these impediments. One way to do that is to have the Scrum Masters get together and say, hey, yeah, we've all got a lot of impediments, but what are the key issues that seem to be a problem for every team? These are the things where you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck if you fix them. So that's the advantage of having the Scrum Master group formalized, is you're able to get these impediments in some type of a backlog. You're able to prioritize them. It makes it much easier for management to make decisions about how to remove them. For the product owner group, the goal is slightly different. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Scrum, the product owners are the people who set the overall direction of the products in which they're in charge of. And they are also responsible for the return on investment for those products or projects. So the thing is, what do you do? How do you measure two projects against one another? So maybe we only have budget to do one. How do I know which project to do? I am here to tell you that in a lot of organizations, that very important decision is made by flipping a coin. It's made by whoever shouts the loudest. In other words, it's not made in a rational way. You can fix that by bringing the product owner groups together so they can start to look at commonality across their projects. They can start to look for little opportunities for synergy, which is going to improve your return on investment. And they can make good decisions about how to judge one project against another. This is also going to be very important for those of you who are in very large organizations, because you're probably not going to have a situation where you only have one Scrum team, for example, working on a project. You might have a project where you have 7, 8, 9, 10 Scrum teams. You need a way to coordinate that work, and a great way to start that is through the product owner organization to get it together as a group. Moving on to the next phase now. So we've got our product owners and Scrum Masters working together. We've got our PMO involved. We've got some tools. The next natural phase that people arrive at is they realize they have to fold in the rest of the organization. It's funny. Sometimes people will come to my course and they'll ask me this question very sheepishly, almost like they think it's a crazy idea, and they'll say, so can Scrum be done by, like the rest of the people in the organization? And I just have to laugh because my answer is always the same. It's like, not only can it, it must. I think it must. You can't have this fundamental mind shift in one section of the organization without it affecting everyone else. And when I teach my Certified Scrum Master courses, there are parts of the course where I give people what I call just kind of things to think about. I call them Angela's Radical Ideas. And so one of the things that I share with them is I say, think about this for a minute. You do Scrum right now. You like it. You like the results it's giving to your project that you're on. What would it be like if you ran your whole company on those principles, with the idea of inspect and adapt, the idea of truly understanding value and ROI, the idea of being committed, of making and meeting commitments, of working within a time box? It's a very, very powerful thing. And for some of you, you might be thinking, oh, yeah, that's a great idea and everything, but it's impossible. But I'm here to tell you it's not. I've seen it happen. And the great thing about it when it happens is everyone speaks the same language. that is half the battle right there. You really have sort of a coming together of purpose. You have the same goals in mind, and you have the same way of pursuing the goal in mind. It's very, very powerful. So folding in these other groups is a very natural thing to do. And then finally, where does all this end? Well, I don't know if you can call it an end because it's ever evolving, but transformation is where people want to reach. They want to reach this place where these agile principles are so internalized that the organization almost doesn't even think about it anymore. They don't have to try to be agile. It's simply the way they work as a unit. And agile transformation looks a little different everywhere that you find it, depending on kind of what organizations are like and sort of what their goals are. And I want to give you some examples just so you can see the differences here. Here are 3 case studies. These are all organizations I've worked with personally. Some of them, especially the bigger ones, are ones you definitely recognize the names of. But more importantly, I just want to describe kind of the state of each of these organizations. I would describe each of them as transformed. So the first one, a very large, well-known semiconductor company. They have about 90,000 employees all over the world. I've done training for this organization for a long time now, training and coaching. They are just a joy to work with. They are so committed to innovation. And even though they're leaders in their organization, what I really admire about them is they don't rest on their laurels. They don't believe that, hey, we're ahead, nobody's going to catch up to us. So they are just relentless in their desire to get better. I was visiting with these guys a few weeks ago, and I'm doing a coaching session with upper management. And we were talking about some challenges that they were having, and they were saying, well, is there some literature out there? Are there some books that we could read about this? And, I kind of did a perusal of some things that were available, and my response to them was kind of what I thought it would be, which is, no, there's really not. And I told them the reason that there isn't is because we're inventing it. We're writing it right now. There are very few organizations in the world, in my opinion, that are as far along as this organization on a large scale in agile transformation. So that's a little bit of what it feels like to be on the bleeding edge. You're inventing the book as you go, if you will. So yeah, and they're okay with that. Like, they're okay with just being willing to be brave, to be on a frontier that not a lot of people have been able to achieve yet. So for a big contrast, let me take you to my second case, which is a small university on the west coast of the United States. These guys are just a joy to work with, a very small technology organization. The way that they got referred to me was a friend of a friend, someone who had come to my class and referred them on to me. And I sort of lovingly called these guys my blank slates. I can honestly tell you I've never taught a private Scrum class before where people knew so little about Scrum. They knew nothing. But the interesting thing about them was they were completely open to everything that I asked them to do. So I said, you guys are like my blank slates. You don't have any bad habits to erase. So I came in, I taught a private class for them, gave them some coaching as well on how to get started, and off they went. And when I came back the next time, it was funny because they were showing me all the things that they did and how they had set up all of the reporting and how they set up their work group and how they were communicating with their stakeholders. And I was kind of amazed, and I said, wow, you guys are doing everything right. And the Scrum Master looked at me kind of quizzically, and he said, well, we just did what you told us to do. And I said, if everyone would do that, my life would be a lot easier. It's really true. It's amazing. They really did do everything I asked them to do. And so their transition was very fast, and it was very painless, which was really, really cool to see. The third case study is a medium-sized chemical company. This organization makes water treatment plants and water treatment chemicals. They're based in the United States, but again, they have locations throughout the world. One of the great joys about working with this organization is they had a culture that ended up being very receptive to Scrum. So what I mean by that is, normally if I were asking you, name a type of a company you think that might be agile, you might not think of a chemical company as agile. And we're talking about people who build big warehouses and water treatment plants. But they had a couple really important cultural elements. First of all, they have a healthy culture that doesn't emphasize fear. What I mean by that is people aren't afraid to make mistakes. That's a kiss of death when you're pursuing something like Agile, because mistakes are a part of living. Mistakes are part of a learning curve, and they're a part of learning the correct path. So if people are fearful, if they live in a state where making mistakes is considered, quote, wrong, it's going to be very difficult to get the benefits from Agile because they're not going to stretch themselves. So this organization doesn't have that problem at all. They have a really open, friendly attitude no matter where I visit them in the world. So it's very pervasive throughout the whole organization. The other thing that they have is concrete support from the top. In other words, their C-levels are absolutely committed to Scrum. They're absolutely committed to their role of removing impediments, which is what management does in an Agile organization, and just very, very supportive of the whole organization. And as a result, again, it's been very, very easy for them to do an Agile transformation. And as you can see from the data at the bottom of the slide, Agile has really gone mainstream now, and definitely at the top of the list of what's really being adopted is Scrum. And if you want my opinion on why that is, it's because it provides benefits at all levels of the organization. It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to make a lot of money with this. Oh, but it beats the work groups up. So sorry, work groups, that's not very good. And it's another thing to say, wow, this is great for the work groups. It's going to facilitate them being really self-organizing. Oh, but we can't really use this to make better profits. So the great thing about Scrum is there's something for everyone here. I think it's one of the wonderful things that it brings to the Agile family. So what happens, though, when things go wrong? Why does Angela get called to come and coach, as I so often do when things are not going well? So there are some pretty common patterns that I see when I go in to coach. First of all is underestimating the amount of change that needs to happen. When I know this is going to happen when I get questions like this. The question will be something like, how can I take Scrum and make it work with our current PMO and requirements, documentation, needs that we have to have? And I always tell people who ask me a question like that, try to ask a better quality question. So for example, a better quality question might be, if Scrum worked completely perfectly with our PMO, what would that look like? What would need to change? I think that's a better quality question. If you're going to try to take Scrum and just slap it on top of your current processes, you're in for a life of misery. It isn't going to work. So you need to accept that things are going to change. As I said before, too, don't ignore your product organization. These people are vital, 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 vital to the success of an Agile transformation. You can't do it if they don't understand what their role is, because their whole purpose in life is to make sure we're building the right thing. Another thing that I've seen is people who neglect their distributed teams. So for many of you out there, distributed teams are a fact of life. Some of you may have teams sprinkled over several continents. That's the norm these days. So those people need training too. And again, they don't need the 60-second explanation over the phone. They need someone who can really help them understand what's going to be expected of them. So it's important to get your distributed teams to training as well, which is part of the reason why at CollabNet we offer training all over the world. I haven't been to Antarctica yet, but I've been just about everywhere else. So, whether you've got teams in in somewhere in the United States, you've got them maybe in the UK, you've got them in Russia, you've got them in China, you've got them in Malaysia. You can find someone to come and help you and get your teams trained. Another problem that I see is that teams will sometimes, and organizations will not make full use of the empirical process. So what I mean by that is making full use of the inspect and adapt points. These are crucial to get the benefits from Agile. Remember, we said that when we're doing an Agile project, we acknowledge that we're not going to get all the requirements up front, probably because it's just impossible to do that. So we need a way to fold them in as we go along. That's the empirical process. That is the, what do we need to do differently next time? It's very important to make sure that you make use of that. Organizations often will forget that tiny little improvements over time have an incredible cumulative effect. So it's important to keep working towards that. And then finally, don't forget to celebrate your successes. Some of you I know have read my white paper on the topic of Agile Transformation, and I talk about the fact that a good Agile team is a low-drama organization. What I mean by that is they make commitments, they meet them, and they just keep cranking out work. And from the outsider's point of view, they almost look like a machine. You know, they just crank that work out. They're so reliable. It's really easy to forget that reliability is a treasure beyond gold. And it's important to reward those teams, to remember that they need all the things that teams that, you know, pull those all-nighters need. They need to hear thank yous. They need celebrations. They need to be treated like people and not like a machine. Because there's nothing so great, I can tell you, having been a product owner, there's nothing so wonderful as a team that produces predictable results. It makes your life so much easier. And with all of these issues, you know, kind of what can help? Get yourself an Agile coach. I have to say, nowadays I am seeing more where people will ask for coaching preemptively. They understand they need the help. But if you wait to ask someone like me to come in until things are falling apart, until you've got a release coming up in 6 weeks that is riddled with bugs, your product organization doesn't want anything to do with Scrum, and your team isn't meeting commitments, and that's exactly, I can tell you a dozen situations where that's what I've walked into. I can help you, but what I'm here to say today is you don't have to wait till you're in agony, right? So don't wait to get help until you're in agony. Do it preemptively so that you don't have to get to that place. I think it makes it better for everyone. So now, before we get to the questions, what I'd like to do is, I know I'm seeing some of the questions, and I know we've had questions about tools and about services. So I want to turn it over to David, who's the GM of the Scrum business line. He'll be able to give you a little bit of information on kind of what CollabNet does in this area that can support you. David, I can turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Angela. So this is the blatant plug section. I won't take a lot of time on this slide because there are some great questions that I've been monitoring coming in, so we want to get to those quickly. But let me just say at this point that, you know, when you've heard the presentation from Angela, I want to just say that Angela is a good representative for the kind of expertise that CollabNet can bring to bear on projects. Angela is a certified Scrum Master and trainer, and is one of the people that delivers our classes and our on-site coaching work. Also, I would want to point out that CollabNet also provides what we think is the best Agile project management tool on the market today, called ScrumWorks Pro. We provide ALM solutions in the form of TeamForge, and a lot of this stuff can be used in a hosted manner with our fully provisioned hosting services. We urge you to reach out to us and find out more information at collab.net. Give us a call, send us an email, that sort of thing. So with that, I think we have, as I say, some great questions. I think we ought to go directly to the questions, and let's try to address as many as we can before the top of the hour. Those that we don't address here, we'll get back to you via email.
So that
Sounds
was
great.
certainly an inspiring presentation, Angela, and David, some good points there as well. And we do have lots of questions. We'll ask everyone to continue putting them in, and we will make sure that the questions get addressed either during this session or afterwards. And of course, you can always come online and see Crossroads in the Agile Journal and ask questions there as well. So, Angela, the first one which came in as soon as you started speaking, some folks were asking about Agile training and coaching services. So this particular person says they're currently engaging both. Is there a difference between training and coaching services between a trainer certified by the Scrum Alliance and a trainer certified by the Scrum org? And their point was they're engaging both, and they wanted to know what the difference is. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess what I would say, I can answer this in a very generic way. There are a number of organizations out there offering certification in various kinds of Agile, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Scrum.org is a for-profit organization. But if you want to get the training to be referred to as either a certified Scrum Master, a certified Scrum Product Owner, or a certified Scrum Professional, then you need to go through the Scrum Alliance. So, for example, I am a certified Scrum trainer through the Scrum Alliance. And the reason that I am with the Scrum Alliance is I really admire what they're doing in the space of Scrum. They are a not-for-profit organization. They have a board of directors made up of people that I deeply respect in the industry. And that gives me a level of confidence. It gives me, I just feel better with something that's, it's not-for-profit. It's there to hold up the sort of the integrity of the Scrum community, and these people contribute greatly to the community as well. So, so are there other places you can get a certification? You bet there are. I mean, I could probably go out tomorrow and start Angela's, Scrum certification. But I would have to tell you, in all honesty, you'd be better to stick with the Scrum Alliance, because I think it's a really well-run organization, and I think they have the right intentions in mind. That's a good question.
All right, Angela, I'm going to come to the Angela's certification program, though. So the next question is, so given that you're invited post the decision of going full on transition, so given that you're brought in after the fact, what insights can you share for the equally tough journey to making that decision in the first place?
I guess, why is it tough? That would be the first thing that I would ask you to ask yourself. So why would it be tough? Be open to the idea that you can try things and you can say, I tried that. Interesting experience. I don't want to do it. You could go out tomorrow and say, I'm going to try being a vegetarian for a day. And then maybe at the end of the day you say, good data, decide I don't want to do that, moving on to another choice. So I think when we get afraid about trying new things, it's because in our mind we close a door behind us. We say, okay, I guess if I jump on this ship, then I'm off the other ship and there's no going back. But the reality is that it doesn't have to be like that. And I guess what I would encourage you to do, this is a conversation I have with executives often when they come to me and they say, we need to do Scrum. Our organization needs to do Scrum. My first question for them is why? Why do you want to do Scrum? Tell me in your own words. And what I'm looking for is, do they have things they're trying to get from it? I can tell you in my own words why I do Scrum, and it doesn't have anything to do with what you'd find in a textbook. I'll tell you the reason that I started my life as a product owner is because to me the product owner role is it's something we have to play in our own personal lives all the time. Here's the product owner role summed up. There's a lot of stuff I want, but I have a limited amount of time and money. I have to decide in that box called limited amount of time and money what fits. That's why I do Scrum. To me, that makes total sense. So if you can take, you're thinking about going to Agile, if you can take in your own mind and say, okay, I'm not going to be afraid. I understand if it doesn't work out, I can go right back to what I was doing before. But the next step is to say, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, why? Why do I want to do it? What is it that we're doing right now that I think could be better? What are the pain points that we have right now that I think might improve with Scrum? I think that's the key to understanding in your own mind what your motivation is. So my advice is to wind it up. Don't be afraid, and then find some reasons that draw you forward. That's the first step.
Well, while we're talking about roles, we have another really great question that just came in, which is, what are the similarities and differences in being a Scrum Master versus a project manager? And I know the PMI has been working on incorporating a lot of Agile principles and some of their certifications. So I think this is a particularly interesting question for you, Angela.
Yeah, excellent question. It's actually the topic of the previous webinar that we did with you guys, which is Scrum for Project Managers. It's a common question that I get. So in a very brief nutshell, the difference is a project manager owns, if you will, the overall success of a given project. A Scrum Master owns the process and nothing more. So, for example, what I mean by that is a Scrum Master acts as a facilitator, a coach. They act as someone who drives organizational change, but they do not manage people. They do not manage a team. They don't tell a team what to commit to. So the only way that they can really influence things like a team, things like a product owner, is through a phrase that is known as subtle control, through influence, through coaching. It's quite a different role. So those of you who are project managers right now, what I tell people who come to my class is I say, you're going to become, if you choose to become a Scrum Master, you're going to become a former project manager. Because you can't take a person in a Scrum Master role who's designed to be neutral, who's designed to be a coach and a facilitator, and still have them owning all those responsibilities for the project. It's a born conflict that's going to drive you crazy. So you have to pick a role. But the good news is there are a lot of behaviors and abilities that you learn as a project manager that are directly applicable to being a Scrum Master, particularly in the role of driving organizational change. What I tell project managers who come to my course is I say, if you can take that ability you have to drive people and you can shift it to drive organizational change, you're going to do amazing things.
All right, we've got just under 10 minutes left, and we have another role-based question, which is, should internal Agile advocates be an official role in the organization, and do you see any resistance to that sort of a way of working?
Sometimes it'll be an official role, and sometimes it will be a de facto role. I don't think that it really matters as long as the person is recognized for the role that they play. And sometimes this will be a role that kind of, or I guess I would call it organically evolves, meaning that somebody naturally is really interested. They go to training before everyone else does. Now they're a certified Scrum Master. Maybe they want to take it the next step, become a certified Scrum professional. They're just very into it, and they really hold everything to a higher standard. I think that can kind of evolve naturally. I haven't seen a lot of resistance to it. If anything, I think people are grateful to have that. They're grateful to have someone they can turn to. And I know I can think of one organization I'm working with where the person in this role he's a manager, he's a mid to high level manager, and he is ending up acting as a coach for all of the Scrum Masters. So he started off as a Scrum Master himself, worked with a few teams, and then now he is sort of a coach of Scrum Masters, and that's just taken everything up a whole level for them. So I think for the most part, organizations seem pretty grateful to have somebody step up to do this role, and whether it's formal or de facto, I just think it's important that you start thinking about it.
It's interesting. You've gotten a number of role questions, and here's just one more. Is there a role of the business systems analyst needed in the Scrum? Since customers are involved all along, can the business user become the business systems analyst instead?
I guess the short answer to that is maybe. Remember that all of those people who are out in the business, they have day jobs too, right? So they're busy, and it's going to be tough to get their time. And the great thing about business analysts is they know how to articulate requirements. They know how to take a bunch of fuzzy, well, I was kind of hoping that we could get a reporting system that would do X and Y and Z and articulate that for a technical team of, okay, and this is what they mean. This is what they're trying to articulate. So what I find with business analysts is a lot of times they end up being part of the product owner's support team. So picture a product owner that's out in a large organization where they're gathering requirements from 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 stakeholders. One poor soul isn't going to do that all by themselves, right? So it's often useful to have a business analyst or several business analysts who can kind of work with the product owner on their team. There's still a very important role. They're still very valuable. So for those of you listening who are business analysts, I don't want you to kind of look at this and go, whoa, where's my job going? There's always a place for people who understand how to articulate requirements, and very often supporting the product owner is a great place to start.
All right, we just have a few more minutes left. Angela, another really great question. Can you speak to how to conduct Agile and Scrum when you have widely distributed teams?
Yes. So the short answer here is this is one area where the continuum, the transformation continuum, is going to be a little different. It's going to be different for you. So you are going to need a tool that is Scrum specific way sooner than the average team. I would think about right when you're in the exploration stage, getting started in your first project. And the reason for that is, think about this. So we're starting our first Scrum project, and we're going to have a planning meeting, which most of you know that's how you start off your first sprint, with a planning meeting. Except we have 2 team members in Palo Alto, and we have 2 in Ireland, and we have 2 in Malaysia. So how in heaven's name are we all going to meet together? One thing about the good Scrum tools is that they allow you to see real-time the same thing. So for example, I'll just give you a personal example with my Scrum team that I'm on. We can look at our product backlog in ScrumWorks Pro. My team can be in Portland, Oregon, and I can be in Finland, and we can all be seeing the same thing real time at the same time. We can make commitments for our current sprint. We can just drag and drop those things out of the backlog into the sprint. We can create our tasks. We can do all those things, all seeing the same thing at the same time. It's the same idea with the daily scrums. So you're going to need a way for the teams to communicate with each other real time. It very much needs to be real time. Try not to get into the, well, we did the daily scrum and we'll send you the minutes. Nah, that's not the same thing at all. So for those of you with heavily distributed teams, you're going to need a tool way sooner than the organization where everybody sits on the 3rd floor of the building together.
And you may want to look at ScrumWorks Pro from CollabNet for that.
All right, that's David Parker is Vice President and General Manager for CollabNet Scrum Business Line, putting in that very appropriate product pitch, and certainly come on to CM Crossroads and the Agile Journal for more information. Just a minute left. Angela, do you want to give us any last thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the one tip that I give people, you're thinking about all of this and you've got a lot of new ideas maybe. I hope we were able to share some new things with you. So what should you do as soon as you're done with this teleconference? What should you do? My advice is get started. Get started. So if you're already doing Agile, you're already doing Scrum, think about, what do we need to do to take our game up a notch? From what I learned in this webinar, what is one thing that we could do? Or if you haven't started yet, get started. I think that is the key. You can't get all that practice. You can't get all that experience until you take that first step. I mean, I know it's a corny thing, but it's really true. The journey of 1,000 miles does begin with the first step. So my final words of advice are, wherever you are in your Agile transformation, get started today on reaching that next step, because until you take the first step, you're not going to go anywhere.
That's great, Angela. You're describing an agile iterative method to adopting agile and iterative development.
It's crazy.
We've been talking with Angela Druckman, Agile Mentor and Certified Scrum Trainer from CollabNet. And we also heard from David Parker, Vice President and General Manager for CollabNet's Scrum Business Line. And by all means, please keep the questions coming, even though we're going to be ending the broadcast shortly. And we'll make sure that we get back to you. And also the discussions, of course, are online, and you can always get more information about these and other products and services from CollabNet. Certainly a fine company promoting agile development. So once again, we've been talking with Angela Druckman and David Parker for CMC Media. I'm Bob Aiello.